Going live.
Good morning. Welcome to the second of our 200 Plus Men Forum for 2021. I'm Jimmy Gray, president of the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 Plus Men. We are a regional organization of men influencing and building better communities by encouraging and inspiring and enabling African American young people and adults to reach their highest potential. To that end, we have designed a series of programs to accomplish our mission and our vision. One of these programs is the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Forum, which was established to present noted speakers to the community. The namesake of the forum, Samuel DeWitt Proctor, was an African-American minister, educator, and humanitarian. He was a strong advocate for civil rights, a gifted orator, and a public servant at the national level, where in 1963 to 64, he served as an associate director of the newly established Peace Corps chapter in Africa for the Kennedy administration. Born in Norfolk, he was also a founding member of the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 Plus Men. We would suggest that after today's program, you take a moment to Google Dr. Proctor to learn more about his momentous life. The deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black men and women at the hands of police officers have led to mass protests, increased media attention, calls for criminal justice reform, and greater accountability from law enforcement. These incidents have further eroded trust and strained relations between police and the communities they have sworn to protect. This panel will examine ways to restore trust and to build a bridge and close the gap between law enforcement and the community. 200 Plus Men believes that their current state of race relations between law enforcement and the African American community can be improved if we engage in open and honest discussions on matters of concern to all of us. This program is a part of our commitment to provide opportunities for substantial dialogue to occur. Thank you for joining us for what we hope will be a thought-provoking virtual panel discussion. And I'd like to now introduce you to the host for today's program, Philip Jones.
Good morning, Mr. Gray and everyone. My name is Philip Jones, and I will be the moderator for today's program. Going to our agenda. The main part of our program today will be a short presentation from each of our 5 panelists, followed by a question and answer session with the audience. To ask questions of the panel, type them into the comment section of your viewing medium, whether you're viewing us from Facebook or YouTube. If you would like to direct your question to a particular panel member, please say so. Selected questions will be chosen by our production staff to be presented to these panel members. After the question and answer period, we will announce the winner of the 2021 Samuel DeWitt Proctor Award, which is presented annually by the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 Plus Men to a community leader in the 757. Also, this entire program will last about 90 minutes. Now, I will introduce our great panelists. Our panel members are Larry Boone, Norfolk Chief of Police, Lance Jones, Hampton NAACP, Galen Knoyton, Virginia State Conference NAACP Region 1 Vice Presidents, Paul Newdigate, Virginia Beach Chief of Police, and Dr. Robert Perkins, Sociology Professor at Norfolk State University. I would now like to introduce each of them individually, followed by their prepared remarks. We'll first go to Norfolk Police Chief Larry Boone. Chief Boone is a native of inner city New Brunswick, New Jersey. Born into a non-traditional family which included 4 siblings. Chief Boone lived in a bleak and chaotic environment until his adolescent years, where his experience led to unfavorable encounters with law enforcement. As a result of these incidents, a decision was made that Chief Boone moved to Northampton County, North Carolina.
Between the police and our communities.
Okay, I'll finish up and then we'll play the video. Chief Boone began his successful law enforcement career with the Norfolk Police Department in 1989. He was appointed as Norfolk Chief of Police December 1st, 2016. During his career, he was served in the Patrol Division, Metro Tactical Unit, K-9 Unit, the Office of Professional Standards, and the Gang Suppression Unit. Now we're going to hear some remarks from Chief Boone.
Greetings. I'm Larry D. Boone, Police Chief of Norfolk. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this discussion surrounding relationship building between the police and our communities, particularly the African American communities. As we reflect on both the tragic and traumatic events impacting the lives of African Americans that occurred during the summer, to include the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, along with the COVID-19 pandemic, we recognize that the history and present-day community policing requires reimagining. Over the past 5 years, the Norfolk Police Department and other police agencies have established programs and initiatives to encourage and build relationships with our citizens by meeting them where they were, to include, but not limited to, schools, places of business, community outdoor events, and places of worship. Today, we are faced with the hard evidence that needs more to be done to address the public health.
Okay, I think we got most of the comments by Chief Boone. So thank you for that video. And what I'll do now is I'll go through everyone else and then I'll bring everyone live. So thank you, Chief Boone.
To encourage and build
So
relationships.
I still hear you in the background, but that's okay. So thanks, Chief Boone. Next, we're going to have Mr. Lance Jones. Lance Jones is a senior family specialist with the Hampton Department of Social Services since 2012, where he serves in the family unit. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology Criminal Justice from Norfolk State University. His community involvement is vast, to include being the former president of Old Point Comfort Kiwanis Club. He is also a member of Transitions Family Violence Services Board of Directors, a mentoring member of the 100 Black Men, vice president of the Norfolk State University Peninsula Alumni Association, first vice president and civic engagement chair for the Hampton Branch NAACP and Cox Communications Peninsula Citizen Advisory Committee. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for joining us today. Next, we're going to have Ms. Gayleen Knoyton. She's a native of Detroit, Michigan, and a community servant and activist. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Hampton Institute University and also graduated from the Civic Leadership Institute in Norfolk, Virginia. Gayleen owns Gayleen LLC, which is a public affairs management and marketing agency, and had the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus as her client for the past 7 years. She is active in the community and serves on the board of several state and local organizations, to include being a member of the executive board for the Urban League of Hampton Roads, first vice chair of organization with the Democratic Party of Virginia, and president of the Greater Hampton Roads Black Democrats. Ma'am, thank you for joining us today. Next, we're going to have Chief Paul Newdigate, and we'll have a video from him followed by Dr. Perkins. So Paul Newdigate was appointed chief of the Virginia Beach Police Department on October 14th, 2020, after a nationwide search. Prior to joining the Virginia Beach Police Department, he served for 30 years with the Cincinnati Police Department, where he held the position of assistant chief and last served as their patrol bureau commander. In that position, he oversaw 800 personnel assigned to 6 patrol districts and various special operations functions, to include K-9, SWAT, gang, youth services, Marine Patrol, civil disturbance, and traffic units. He has been actively involved in several professional organizations and has attended several executive leadership schools. Chief Newdigate earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Justice from the University of Louisville and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice from the University of Cincinnati. Now we'll hear some remarks from Chief Newdigate.
Thank you to the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 plus men for this opportunity to come speak about your Virginia Beach Police Department. Special thanks to retired VBPD Deputy Chief John Bell, who reached out regarding this collaboration. I'm extremely grateful to be able to participate and begin making a connection with this esteemed group. I was blessed to be appointed Chief of the Virginia Beach Police Department on October 14, 2020, after a 30-year career with the Cincinnati, Ohio Police Department. I took over as only the 4th chief since its merger with Princess Anne County in 1963. The previous 3 chiefs all served significant tenures with the PD, with my immediate predecessor, Jim Severa, serving 10 years as chief. Jake Jaycock served 10 years as chief prior to him, and Chief Charles Wall before them. Your Virginia Beach Police Department serves the largest municipality in the state of Virginia, with a population of 450,000 full-time residents, plus the millions who visit each year. The police department consists of over 1,000 employees with an authorized strength of 813 sworn officers. Unfortunately, we currently have only 719 at this time, leaving a void of over 90 officers. In my short time here, I have found that VB.
Thank you, Chief Newdigate. So now we're going to go to Dr. Perkins, and then I'm actually going to turn over the program to the panelists, and we'll open up the floor for any questions that the audience has for us. So Dr. Robert K. Perkins is a native of Buckingham, Virginia. He studied at Norfolk State University and Iowa State University. At Norfolk State, he obtained his Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology and a Master of Arts degree in urban affairs. He obtained his second Master of Science degree at ISU in sociology and a Doctorate of Philosophy degree in sociology. Dr. Perkins has had many careers in law enforcement, community organizing, and higher education. Currently, Dr. Perkins has had many Dr. Perkins is the program coordinator for 2 top-tier master programs, Master of Arts in Criminal Justice and Master of Arts in Urban Affairs. Currently, Dr. Perkins serves on several committees throughout the Hampton Roads area, the Norfolk Community Criminal Services Board for the City of Norfolk, founding and former member of the Fair and Impartial Policing Work Group for the City of Norfolk Police Department, task force for the K-12 Zoning Commission in Norfolk, former board member for Teams with a Purpose, and the Virginia School Boards Association to serve as the urban specialist to create economic and resource equity for K-12 public schools in the state of Virginia. Dr. Perkins, thank you for joining us today. Perfect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now that you've met our panelists, the floor is open for any questions that you may have. Thank you. And right now I see that individuals are sending me questions. So give us 1 second. We'll go ahead and have that first question tuned up. Thank you. So it looks like right now we're still waiting for some audience engagement, but that's fine. I have a lot of questions that I want to ask all of our great panelists. So I think I'll direct the first questions to the 2 police chiefs. We know that it's been a long and a rough year, 2020, for a lot of historically disenfranchised communities. I would love to know, after the events of last year, what changes have been made in your department to really facilitate communication between all parts of our community. We'll start with Police Chief Boone and then go to Chief Newdigate. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for the opportunity to speak to Hampton Roads and people beyond that. With respect to your question, the Norfolk Police Department has been very progressive prior to this summer's event. We became very progressive with respect to community outreach starting, I want to say somewhere around 2013, 14, shortly after Ferguson. We started meeting with community organizers, those that would facilitate protest. We also started to develop various programs that addressed anyone from 5 to gray. Our programs have been highlighted nationally and internationally. Our efforts with respect to those that would do protests have paid off. As you know, there were multiple protests across the country as well as Hampton Roads. We were fortunate in Norfolk not to have any rioting, looting, arrest, things of that nature. I think that's a contribution to the women and men of this department, realizing that folks have to have an opportunity to express their grievances, their First Amendment privileges, and that's something we've embraced. We will continue to embrace, and hopefully things will continue to go as they have gone here in the city of Norfolk.
Thank you, sir, for that. We'll turn it over to Chief Newdigate, and then I have probably 30 or 40 of my own questions. So it'll be a great hour discussion until we have some questions. So Chief Newdigate, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And once again, good morning to the group. Thank you for this opportunity. Very impactful question. Coming in the door as an outsider has really given me an opportunity to take a look at the culture, the strengths and weaknesses of this organization. One of the things that we have done from the very beginning is realize that our community engagement is not where it needs to be as an organization. So we have decentralized our community engagement function, put it in the precincts under the commands of those precinct commanders, where we now have officers to really be that direct conduit to the community groups to get that feedback. We're really looking to evolve that program from a designated community liaison officer to designated community liaison squads in all of our precincts. Much like Chief Boone, we are having those direct conversations with those groups in our community. We have an obligation to facilitate First Amendment and free speech. And that's what we envision for 2021, that there's still a lot of raw feelings in this community. We know that our citizens are going to want to come out into the streets and make that known. And it is absolutely the police's responsibility to ensure and help that our community has the right to engage in free speech and First Amendment activity. And that's what I think you will see out of VBPD going forward into the future.
Thank you, sir, for those comments. I'm going to say the next question, and I'll let we'll actually go. We'll go Dr. Perkins, then we'll go Ms. Galen, and then Mr. Jones, and then we can kind of circle as needed. But I have a question, Dr. Perkins and the rest of the panelists. What are your thoughts on improving the relationship between the police and the community? This question comes from Mr. Winston Odom. I know it's going to be an interesting answer. So, Dr. Perkins, over to you. Over to you, brother.
Oh, so you know me. Okay. First, I want to say thank you for the invitation. Allow me to be a part of this panel for 200 plus men. It is an honor. The question, it's a must. We must have better relationship between the police and the community. I can get a chance to play my video or make opening statements, but I have a history of working with the two groups, trying to bring them together to encourage trust between each other, because everybody wants to go home safe after a police stop. The police officers want to go home safe. The community members want to go home safe. So how do we get there? You know, I tell my students all the time, do not fight your case inside the street. That is what the courtroom is for. Utilize the courtroom. But the reality is that we're living in a society where racial strife is fundamental. It's in the front of everybody's mind. And it is an intrinsic part of any interactions that people are having today. So to deny that there are stress there and there is lack of trust there will be denying the reality. And if we deny the reality, then we cannot fix the problem. I just published a paper, it'll be coming out probably in 2 months. And I'm talking about a colorblind society in which people rear their children to believe that race is no longer an issue in society. So don't worry about race. Don't pay attention to race. It's not real. But the reality is that there is a theory that's called colorblind racism, which is the argument that people can be in a racist society and hold up racist ideologies and practices without actually being racist themselves. So until we attack the systems, the cultures, and the underground earth of all of the problems that we're dealing with race, it's going to continue to be a problem. I'm happy to see the two chiefs on this morning, and I have more comments, but I'll save that for a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll go to Ms. Galen and then Mr. Jones, and then we'll kind of circle back as needed.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jones, and thank you 200 Plus Men for inviting me to be on this panel. Today, I'm representing the Virginia NAACP as the Regional Vice President for Region 1 and Political Action Chair for the state. It is critical that there is a relationship between the police and the community, but we can't use words. What does that mean? There's many layers that have to be peeled off to get to the root of the cause. And much like my person before me said, racism is a big cause of it. You have to look at the cultures from the community, the culture of the community and the culture of the police force. And we have to come up with some shared principles. And I believe that once we come up with shared principles and try to derail some of the inequities that we have within our police force, I believe that we can finally get to some form of a relationship between the community and the police.
Thank you, ma'am, for those comments. Over to Mr. Jones.
All right, thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Jones and the 200 Plus Men. I will say that transparency and also the relationship between African-American men who are, I think, the most affected by the relationship with the police is community policing. Just not seeing the police when things are going on in the community, but just outside of that. So if it's when something terrible is happening, if the police is more involved with the community and also just being more transparent with the African-American community, that would be a start to the trust base of the police and African-American men.
Perfect. Thank you. And I know that the Chiefs want to jump in here. So I do say for all the panelists, we'll try to keep the answers, less than 90 seconds, just to kind of have a rapid fire dialogue. So I'll kind of open it up to the panelists, and whoever wants to take this, we can kind of go from there. The next question that we have comes from Dana Dixon. She says, what is everyone's thoughts on community policing? What are your department or what are police department plans around community policing and managing mental health crisis in cities when the police are called? I know this is a national-wide debate. So to make it kind of comprehensive, we'll start with one chief and then someone from NAACP, and we'll kind of go back and forth. So if one of the chiefs want to start, over to you, gentlemen.
Well, I'll start with the community policing piece. Community policing has been in existence going way back to foot patrol days. And we've evolved from going from foot patrol to being inside of a vehicle. And we are reverting back to trying to be more intimate with respect to how we encounter citizens. Community policing is a term that's used quite frequently, and I'm not really sure people truly understand what it is. And that's to include police departments. Oftentimes you'll see police departments showing up for photo ops, and that's the end of it. Here in Norfolk, we want to be authentic. We want to touch your heart, your soul, and your spirit. We are not going to do any programs that are one-offs. We are going to commit. For an example, we have a program where we interface with our Title I schools. I have about 60 officers that volunteer every year for the last 6 years to mentor a child in the kindergarten, first grade for the whole school season. Now, what does that do? That helps break down the barriers that young individual may have about police. And at the same time, it greatly impacts the women and men of this profession, so that they don't have those preconceived notions about folks that may come from a particular neighborhood. That's authentic, folks. That's not a one-off. That's something where we commit, and we've been doing things such as that for the last 6, 7, 8 years. I'll leave the other part to Chief Newdigate.
Thank you, Chief. And I'll just speak to the mental health piece. We've had an established co-responder model in Virginia Beach for several years now, recognized by the state. We know that mental health crisis is more than just a police response. And that's why we're very lucky that we already have a designated co-response model with the clinicians here in Virginia Beach that really needs to be embraced from a national model. And this is where we struggle, is policing realizes that we should not be the primary responders to the vast majority of these incidents. Unfortunately, because of the dynamics, we find ourselves being those frontline responders. And that's where we really need the back end for that warm handoff to our psychiatric emergency services personnel. Because the challenge is there's not a lot of infrastructure on the back end. And so the police are continually responding to the same types of incidents. And 9 out of 10 times, we're very successful. We de-escalate, we're empathetic, we do everything that you expect out of your police department. But I think the law of averages is that 10th time, things don't go the way that they need to go. And that's what makes the viral video. So your police officers realize that we need assistance with this. And that's what we're looking for collectively from the group, is to make sure that all our voices are speaking together to empower our legislators to allocate the appropriate funding so that we have a holistic response to this that's just not laid at the feet of your police department.
And Philip, could I just piggyback just a comment on Chief Newdigate's statement? When you look at use of force incidents, particularly use of force where there's a death, 20% up to 25% involve officers responding to mental health issues. If we could reduce our footprint in that regard, just think of the number of senseless deaths could be avoided. And I think here in Virginia, with some of the police reforms that are coming down the pike, we will greatly reduce our footprint with respect to encountering homelessness, people facing mental crisis, as well as drug addiction.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Hi, Mr. Jones. I want to make a comment.
Yeah.
This past special session with the General Assembly in August, there was a special session that focused on criminal justice. The Marcus Alert bill moved through this session. 2 years ago, Marcus Davis Peters was murdered by a police officer in Richmond, and he had mental health issues. And so this bill was passed and signed by the governor, where all police departments are to address mental health in terms of having a mental health team to go out with a police officer if there's a case with a person who has a mental health issue. And so therefore, this is something that's going to address, is going to really help with this matter as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. I would like to just piggyback off of what Chief Newdigate spoke on about the partnership with mental health professionals in the police department. The Hampton NAACP has had several discussions about this matter with having a mental health professional go out with the police, because a lot of times that the issues are not with the police or anything criminal. A lot of it is mental health. So with the Hampton NAACP, we have discussed this issue, and also as Ms. Connaughton spoke about the Marcus Alert. So that is a good thing that we can come up with, where the state can come up with, to give police assistance with that.
Thank you so much to our panelists for that question and answer. We have a question from Anthony Sandifer. To the wider panel, what reforms in policing do you believe are necessary to ensure that police officers are not allowing racial bias to influence their interaction with African-American citizens? To keep it fair, we can start with Dr. Perkins and kind of go, clockwise or counterclockwise.
Well, a lot of police departments are utilizing fair and impartial policing training in order to start the eliminate racial bias in their practices. And they are also doing a good job at evaluating policies and procedures, and so that officers can be held more accountable if they were to break those policies and procedures. Now, what I think that can be done differently is stop pouring all of this money into training for impartial and implicit bias with white folks coming in there telling you about Black people's experiences. We got credible African American, talented African Americans with degrees, with experiences in this area. They can do the same job and better because they understand the environment, they understand the people, they know the context, the networks. So why are we going to Florida to fly folk in to talk to you about your city when you got people right here, universities, colleges right here that can do the same thing, that know and have an invested interest? And I have to admit, it bothers me somewhat when a Black person have a bad experience with the police, and then the police departments want to come and pull them in and say, tell us about your experience so officers can know what you went through. Huh? So you have traumatized a person in the city, in your department, or an officer has, and then you want them to come and relive their experiences, to be traumatic even more, to experience PTSD and so forth and so on. Here again, I do believe there's a time and a place to do all these things and have all these discussions, but we need to move beyond words and words on paper and get it to practice. And the one way that we can do that is start utilizing our own communities to help solve. That's the true definition of community policing, where the community and the police departments come together to create a better environment and safer world for all.
Thank you, sir. And just to make it more of a collaborative conversation, we'll try to go like Dr. Perkins and then one of the police chiefs and then back. So if that's to try to just keep it a fair for the timing of the program. So thank you, sir. Does any of the police chiefs want to respond? And then we'll go to Ms. Knoyton.
Sure, I can jump in on that one. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is open up our data to public scrutiny. The data we collect as a police organization belongs to the community. And historically, we have probably not done a good enough job about documenting what we do, who we stop, when we stop, and under those circumstances. So as we move forward, I intend to put a lot of that data public facing out there so the community can see what your police department is doing on a daily basis. And when we spread some of that sunshine on some of those operations, I think that that helps us, puts us in a good spot that we can talk about the context around what is going on.
Thank you.
Dr. Perkins, I heard you loud and clear.
Well, sir, one sec. We'll keep it fair. We'll go to Ms. Knoyton, and then we'll go back over to you.
See, we're not gonna make this the police chief show.
I got you. I got it. Don't worry.
Let's get real about this. Until we diversify the police force, then these issues can be addressed. It won't be addressed until then. I pulled data from the Commonwealth Institute, and I was alarmed by seeing the low rate of diversity in women, African Americans, people of color that are coming through the police department, and especially in leadership. Not only police chiefs, I'm talking about leaderships to lead up to become a police chief. So we can talk about all these other things about, having policies and having this and having that. But until we have a police force that looks like the community, you're still going to have issues.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We'll go back over to Chief Boone quickly, and then we're going to actually hit the next question, and I'll have Mr. Lance Jones start that out. And we'll get more of like a 50-50 split,
With respect to implicit bias training and all the other trainings that have followed since 2014, Dr. Perkins, he's correct. There's tends to be a reluctance to reach out to Black professionals to bring them in front of a majority white classroom. That's the challenge. So what we have to do with respect to how do we ensure that African Americans aren't impacted adversely by officers, first we have to hire the right people, okay? Because all the training in the world will not stop you from being who you truly are. You know, we got body-worn cameras and we thought that was going to be the panacea to stop some of these things from happening. Well, guess what? It just exposed the things we thought has been happening for years. So under conflict, you are going to be who you truly are, which is why I say you have to start by hiring the right people first to try to eliminate some of that stuff. And Ms. Connaughton's right, diversity is a piece of it. You know, we celebrate diversity here at the Norfolk Police Department. And sometimes we hype that word up, diversity, but we also have to include inclusion. Here in the Norfolk Police Department, we are the most diverse police department in the state with respect to leadership as well. We just recently promoted our first African-American female assistant chief, Michelle Naughton. And we have representation from LGBTQ+, the Asians, Hispanic, African Americans, and white at every level of supervision.
Mr. Jones, can I just tag that really quickly?
Yes, sir.
I agree with the diversity comment from Gayleen and also Chief Boone. But please remember that that's quantitative, but there's a qualitative part that has to go along with it. So it's not just about having the number of bodies. It is also actually incorporating culture, understanding, and making sure people have the right agenda to eradicate racism or racial biases out of these policies.
I appreciate this conversation. I actually want to keep this dialogue going. So if you have any more comments, I know Mr. Jones hasn't been able to get on this question. Sir, if you have any comments, and if not, we can kind of go back to Ms. Connaughton. I know there was some hands that were raised. People wanted to have kind of a free-flowing dialogue, and I love the candor and the honesty of all the panelists. So thank you.
I do agree with Ms. Connaughton and Chief Boone in regards to the diversity piece.
Thank you, sir. I have some of the, I guess I have some of my own questions while we wait for more questions to kind of populate in. And we could actually start with the NAACP answering first. But I know that there's been a national-wide push to have more African Americans, police officers, or people who are actually from the community to represent themselves on police force. What do you think are some of the barriers to entry, if you will, for that to happen? We know that it's hyped up, from national down to the actual state, down to the localities. But what is the thing that is stopping that from actually manifesting itself into our police departments? I'm from Newport News, and I can say we're trying to work on it, but we'd love to get your take. And we can actually start with NAACP and then kind of move over to the chiefs to keep it fair.
Okay, I can say just getting people in the community to trust the police, but in Hampton, they do have the law enforcement academy within the Hampton high schools. So what they're doing is training our high schoolers who are interested in becoming law enforcement to become police officers, which I think that upon graduation, that's a great thing for them to just start their career with the training that they receive in high school.
I think that there are barriers in terms of getting African Americans involved in the police department. First of all, I think the challenge is even more than ever that they don't want to be involved in it because of the incidents that's been going on for the last 10 years, I can say, more so. But I do think that let me just say this. Everybody that look like us ain't for us, So let me just preface by saying that, because your heart's got to be in it, and you have to have integrity in the whole 9 yards. But I do believe that, you know, the earlier you start with being able to get more African American male and females involved in law enforcement, even younger than, say, in high school, middle school, or whatever, that, you know, to grow up to at one time you used to want to grow up to be a police officer. We have to get back to that point where a young person want to become a police officer, look at a police officer to be a role model. And that's what we need to get to.
So the barriers with respect to diversifying police departments, you have to look at the history of the law enforcement profession. I know you folks have heard this before, and some may not know it, but in the southern states, police departments were constructed for slave patrol. And we graduated from slave patrol to enforcing Jim Crow laws. And then we graduated from enforcing Jim Crow laws to mass incarceration. So it goes beyond 10 years ago. We're talking about hundreds of years.
400.
And folks are at the kitchen table talking about police and how they interface with minority communities. We as a profession, we have to talk about that. We have to tell our recruits that history so that they know when they go in certain communities why they may not be trusted, and we have to earn it. And we have to continue to earn it. We have to talk about the ugly. We can't hide it. And we have to get folks involved that want to make a difference. And that's going to take a challenge from some of my white brothers and sisters in law enforcement. They have to speak the truth. It just can't come from me or anyone that looks like me. It has to come from them as well. And I'm not saying they're not doing it, but they need to be more vocal.
Okay, thank you, sir. I actually have a fairly important question, and I'm going to ask it of all of the panelists. And we can actually start with one of the police chiefs, and then we'll go back and forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, what are your position on establishing a civilian review board that has the authority to thoroughly review complaints of serious misconduct by police officers? And kind of the second part of that question is, should these review boards have the authority to make recommendations and present binding determinations on action to be taken? And once again, we'll start with one of the police chiefs and then go back and kind of make it a more collaborative conversation. So over to you, gentlemen.
Chief Boone, if I can take this one, I've got a little experience in this area.
Go for it.
You know, in regards, it's what the community wants. It's, you know, we are part of the community, but I can give you some past experience from having a citizen review board in Cincinnati with independent investigations, subpoena power, many of the things that are being talked about right now. In regards to a true board, I think we have to remember that if we want true independent investigations, that is just not a community board. You have to hire trained individuals that are familiar with administrative law, rule of law, how to do administrative investigations, if it's going to hold standing in the community and appear fair to our officers when they're being investigated. So there is a significant cost to standing up a panel the way that it's being discussed. You know, I can just tell you from experience from 2003 forward with the Cincinnati CCA model, I don't know that it ever used its investigative subpoena power. We have the authority to compel our officers to comply with an investigation. So, you know, and we also found that 98% of the time, what internal would recommend and find in their investigations, that same finding was mirrored by the CCA. So just some experience with that model, I think, you know, if that's what the community decides for us, you know, we can make that happen. But I just want to put out there that it's more than just a community board. We have to have dedicated individuals, and there is a dedicated cost to us putting this in place. but it also does give the community, that understanding that the police are just not holding themselves accountable, that there is an independent body reviewing what we are doing and making sure that we're doing things for the right reason. And if that's what they decide for in Virginia Beach, we can make it happen. We're going to let the community dictate that for us.
Thank you, sir. Does any of the other panelists want to?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
This was a top issue with us, a top bill priority for us for the NAACP during the special session in August, is to establish a true civilian review panel, and with investigative subpoena power. And it's not just anyone could be on this panel. You have civil rights activists and leaders that have experienced this before. You have lawyers, and just not anyone could be on the civilian review panel. It got watered down. So now it's watered down, and now it's up to the localities to decide whether they want to have a civilian review panel or not. We want it to be mandatory across the Commonwealth, and that didn't happen. And so now what's happening is that in the localities, you have many police chiefs who don't want it, and they're totally against it, and then you have citizens that don't really know about it, to what it really does. And so we're trying to educate. Citizens on what this really means, and that holds accountability. Recently, it was a bill to include the sheriffs. The sheriff's office is not included in the civilian review panels because they're elected. They feel that 4 years later from then that they're elected, they can be elected off, but that's not true either. But this is a big issue for us.
Thank you, ma'am. So what I'll actually do, I'll kind of streamline things. So after Ms. Knoyton went, we'll actually go Mr. Jones, and then we'll go over to Chief Boone, and then we'll go over to Dr. Perkins to kind of keep it symmetrical. I like things in order, I like my house in order. Okay. So Mr. Jones, over to you, and then over to Chief Boone, and then Dr. Perkins.
Okay, I was going to mirror of what Ms. Norton did say, but also with my thoughts on the Citizen Review Board is that the board is not chosen by the police chief or the police department, but chosen fairly with citizens from throughout the community, because we want this to not be a one-sided issue or decision. So as Ms. Norton said, just get community members who are trained in that field of investigating that, so that the decision can be made proper.
Thank you for those comments. Chief Boone, over to you, and then to Dr. Perkins.
Well, with respect to CRBs, I agree we have to be accountable, transparent, and intentional. The challenge is there are 18,000 police departments in the country. And thus far, only about 180, give or take, have CRBs. The other piece of that is, historically, CRBs, if there isn't any influence by the chief of police, tend to be more lenient. I don't have a problem firing someone that should be fired during the holidays. The data shows that when CRBs are led by civilians, they tend to be a little more lenient. My position is we should have them, but the final outcome with respect to discipline recommendations should be held by the chief of police.
Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Perkins, you'll have the final word, and then to keep it fair, I'll let you go first on the next question.
Oh, you don't have to be fair. I'm good.
Okay.
I just want to say from the outset, I'm actually not affiliated with NAACP, but I truly respect their work. Community Review Board, I have been fighting for that for years, and Chief Boone knows this. I've had conversations with his department many, many times about having it. I think that what Chief DeWitt said about creating trust and transparency is important. And this is a way where the community can have a voice in how they want their safety measures met in the community. And I think that is hugely important. All at the same time, I agree with the representatives of the NAACP about making sure that the right people get on these panels and have good discussion, adequate discussions, and law-abiding discussions. When I think about what has happened with Breonna Taylor, for example, it wrecks my mind to understand why charges have not been brought. And if we had someone there, the community's voices to be lifted up, I think that outcome would have been different. If we don't increase more trust in the community for our policing, we're going to continue to decline in terms of safety mechanism, but rise in terms of murders, in terms of debilitating resources for the police department and for the community. So we must turn this around. And the final thought on that is, if there are police actions, why wouldn't we want the community to have a voice in whether or not they were justified?
Thank you, all of our panelists, for that question and answer dialogue. I kind of have a follow-on question, and once again, we'll start with Dr. Perkins. And this question comes from Anthony Sandifer. Police have layers of protection, laws, unions, et cetera, that shield them from accountability. What enhancements are needed to ensure that African Americans, or really historically disenfranchised communities, receive equitable, justice?
Yeah, Mr. Sandifer, gosh, I wish I had a really good answer for that. First of all, I thank you for your question, because it's a brilliant question, and it's something that we need to do more investigation on. Coming from the academic side, I would argue that procedural justice, let me start here. The idea is that Lady Justice is blind. But that in itself is racist, because how can you treat everybody the same when we are so different? And so you cannot talk to an African American male the exact same way you talk to a white female, for example, and get the same responses. So when we talk about procedures and things, that's why those trainings are so needed. And that's why we need to understand that all different groups have their sensibilities because of their lived experiences. But to your direct question, African American receive equitable procedural justice. First, we need to take the finance out of good representation in the criminal law. If you don't have the finance to hire a good attorney, you're in trouble in this country, in the state of Virginia, in the city of Norfolk, in the city of Virginia Beach. And attorneys are very expensive. They'll charge you $325 just to talk to them for 30 minutes. And so not a lot of African Americans have those type of resources. That's why I said earlier that I have a lot of respect for the NAACP, because they assist people with legal defenses and a lot of other things. But the first thing we need to do in the criminal justice system is to get the money out of it. And we know when we go into courtrooms, it is no longer about finding and discovering the truth. It's about win or lose. And I appreciate what Chief from Virginia Beach said a little earlier. And I was wondering when he made his comments, I know I'm going too long, but I was wondering when he made his comments earlier, was he actually endorsing defunding the police when you talked about resources for mental health on the streets and not utilizing police for all those other different types of incidences in the community? But that's another question. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Perkins. Do any of the chief police want to respond to that and just kind of keep this dialogue going?
Yeah, I'll address the equitable procedural justice question. You can't measure what you don't know. So one way law enforcement can be held accountable with respect to their encounters with African Americans is to capture the data. You have to examine the stops you have with whom and where and why. That's something we just started here in Norfolk. We're looking at how often we interface with African Americans compared to other folks in the city. The other piece to this question with respect to protection of unions, here in Norfolk, that hadn't been a problem. I know that that's an issue in northern police departments. They have strong unions. Virginia, as of now, we don't have strong unions. You know, I've fired and I've seen officers get fired, many of them, and justifiably so. But I do recognize that there is other institutions outside of Virginia that may not hold their officers as accountable as they should.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that honesty and that dialogue. I have a question here. I'm going to flash it on the screen next. A 2006 report from the FBI confirmed the infiltration of white supremacy in policing. To the chiefs, how are your respective police departments addressing this issue? And we can actually go both police chiefs, and then we can try to open it up to the other panelists.
I'll take it to start with. I think the biggest thing we can do right now where it's manifesting itself is in social media and taking a hard look at what our officers are doing, what they're retweeting, what they're liking, and making sure that we have a very strong social media policy in place. And I tell you, one of the areas where this has really hit home is with social media. Commonwealth's attorney is taking a very vested interest in some of the things that are occurring, and it's actually put several of our officers on a Brady exclusion list where they will no longer be allowed to or prefer to testify in court. So some of these likes and retweets are having long-lasting implications for these individuals' careers.
I think Chief Newdigate said it as well as I could say it. So the only thing I would add to it is, as police chiefs, we have to take a hard look under the bed as to who we're hiring. Look at their social media history, because if January 6th of this year did not highlight that as a profession, we have some challenges. It was very sad to see that event and to know that law enforcement, to some degree, was out there as part of the rioters. So we have an issue, we have a problem, and we need to come together. And when I say we, the police chiefs, and how do we systematically address that issue?
Thank you, gentlemen. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in on this question? And if not, I have 40 other questions that I would love to talk about.
I just want to say is that, look at your national law enforcement organizations. Who spoke out when the Breonna Taylors and the George Floyds were murdered? It's a culture that's been there, as Chief Boone said. It wasn't 10 years ago, it was 400 years ago, really, 401 years ago. But if you look at it, the overarching organization in itself are not speaking out against what's been happening. I mean, it's been happening, but the local forces, they have their own entities and their own efforts. But if you look at the national law enforcement organizations, I have yet to see them speak out.
Well, I can tell you, Chief Boone spoke out. He was on CNN. I saw.
I agree. I said local law enforcement.
I think he just wanted to be on national TV. But anyways, but white supremacy, on a serious note, white supremacy, it's a dangerous, very dangerous ideology, because not only does it impacts racial minority, certain religious group, but it tears at the very fabric of our democracy. And that is what is very concerning. Now, I agree January 6th propelled attention toward white supremacy in police departments across the country. But the reality is, we all know that white supremacy has been at the root of police departments. And African Americans and Hispanic Americans and Jewish American and Asian Americans has been ringing the alarms for many, many years, and they have gone virtually ignored. And so now it's in our face and we cannot ignore it. We cannot ignore it anymore. So it is a sad reality. And I have to admit, as an academician, I did not see that coming. And I studied white supremacy as part of my doctoral experience. I did not see that coming. I did not see folks climbing up walls to get inside of the Capitol. I mean, I was blindsided. I was dumbfounded. And the reason why I did not see that coming is because I was certain that we had better protection for our federal representatives than that.
Thank you, Dr. Perkins, and everyone for that answer. For some of our audience members, I kind of wanted to reflect on what Chief Newdigate said when he talked about the Brady list. And the Brady list is something that basically has, and it tracks police that have credibility issues. And it's like a very like a nationwide list of people who have made false statements or have done some things, and it's known as the Brady list. I'm mindful of everyone's time. We have about 7 or 8 more minutes, and I really want to get to this topic of body cameras. I know we've talked about it a little bit. I know Ms. Knoyton over there, I know she wants to jump in. Ma'am, I'm gonna turn it over to you. But I know right now that currently some departments have body cameras, some do not. I know some policies or some departments have differences in when they're supposed to be on or off. We'd love to get that dialogue started on. Ma'am, you can probably get us started. Why is it important to, one, have body cameras, and what should be the standard here in the Commonwealth? Like, what should our police have when it comes to body cameras? So over to you, ma'am. Oh, I think you're still muted there, Ms. Knoyton.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, this is a big concern of the NAACP, that police officers use body cams and not at their discretion. Use the body cams at all times when it's supposed to be used and turned on. The other issue is that make sure you have up-to-date body cams. Now, I know they're expensive, but they have programs where you can update your body cams if you sign this. They have programs where you can sign up where you can have updated body cams after so many years or whatever. We looked into it, and I know in Hampton, I know our police chief looked into that, and that we're supposed to have that kind of program. But body cams, a lot of cases that we get to come to us, is the police chief, the police officer might have it on, or he may not have it on. You know, or it'll come on in the middle of the incident. And so it has to be some type of consistency across the board with this body cam. And we hold their feet to the fire. You know, you have to have your body cam on. Why is it not on?
But we see misconduct from video, from citizen videos, from body cams, and there's still no accountability held to those officers, for example. Not all, but I'm just saying some of those extreme examples. So I'm interested in knowing how effective body cams are for getting rid of bad seeds in police departments.
Well, as I alluded to earlier, body cams are an important tool. We need them. It keeps everybody honest to a degree. As I said earlier, under conflict, you're going to be who you are, regardless of how much training you had, which is why I said earlier, we have to hire the right people. Body-worn cameras with respect to the Norfolk Police Department is to be turned on the moment you step out the car. They are to be turned off once the event is over. There is discipline for one not activating their body-worn camera. When we first implemented them in 2014, it took a time for officers to have that set memory to activate their camera. So we were doling out discipline left and right. Body-worn cameras help us with respect to training. We observe randomly officers and how they interact with citizens. We have also disciplined officers for conducting themselves outside of policy, which we may not have known if it wasn't for the body-worn camera. Again, it's not a panacea to fix everything, but you have to address those issues when the camera tells you it's there.
Thank you. And we'll actually go to Mr. Jones, and then we'll go to Chief Newdigate to kind of wrap up the body camera discussion. I know it's something that's in the forefront of a lot of individuals' mind in our area, and I want everyone to at least speak on it. So thank you.
Okay, for the body cams, I've noticed, well, from just seeing that, I mean, a concern of mine is just why don't you get the beginning? And from what I've just learned now is that the officers turn them on. I was under the impression that body cams were on from the officer being in the car, the entire shift. So that explains to why a lot of times when you do hear about issues, you miss like the beginning part. You just get when the citizen is being arrested and the altercation that's occurring. So I just learned something. So thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. And before we actually go to Chief Newdigate to wrap us up, Ms. Knoyton, I know you have a comment.
One thing that I don't think that the average citizen knows that you can go in and look at your body cam. If you're pulled over, you can go look at what the film in the body cam. A lot of people don't even know that. And as an NAACP, when we have some of our members come to us who've been pulled over by the police, we go with them to review the body cam film. And so everyone needs to know that they have that right to go in there to look at it.
Thank you, ma'am. Chief, over to you for the last word on this question.
100% agree with body cams. We're not where we need to be in Virginia Beach. We only have our frontline workers wearing them currently. I've made it a priority to try to allocate funding to equip the entire department. We believe in body cams. I can tell you that Cincinnati, and I can speak to my experience, when we deployed them 3.5 years ago, department-wide, there was reluctance, there was resistance. If you ask those officers now, they would not patrol without a body cam because they know it keeps them accountable, it keeps the community accountable, and it doesn't run 100% of the time, but many of us have, and I'm sure that Chief Boone has it in. We have a pre-record buffer. So if an officer is driving down the street, they're going to grab lunch, something occurs outside of what their normal response is. When they hit it, it will capture the preceding minute or 2 minutes to try to make sure that we're not missing those critical contacts. But couldn't agree more. Body cams are an instrumental piece in making sure that the police department is transparent, accountable. We just need to be timely in how we release some of that, which goes back to some of the comments from our NAACP chair.
Thank you so much. Being mindful of time, we actually only have about 2 minutes left, and I want to give everyone, 20 to 30 seconds for any closing remarks or comments. This has been an amazing conversation, the best way to start my Saturday. I want to kind of turn it over to the panelists for 20 seconds each, just kind of last parting words. We can start with let's start with Dr. Perkins, and then we'll go to a chief, and we'll kind of go back and forth.
Again, thank you for allowing me to take part of this panel discussion. It has been incredibly enriching. And I want to say to the community, from where I sit, I'm encouraged about the Hampton Roads area and what our chiefs are doing to make contact with the community to build trust. In particular, Chief Boone and Chief Newdigate. I've met with both of them. I've been knowing Boone for years, but I met with the other chief very recently, and I feel very confident in their vision. What I'm praying for is that their vision is trickled down to the street level cops so we can find some peace in very troubling times.
Thank you. We'll go over to Chief Boone next.
Well, we spent the last 80, 90 minutes talking about police, but I would be remiss if we did not highlight the women and men of this profession. We understand there are some bad apples, and we typically move rather swiftly in removing those bad apples. What I'm about to say sounds kind of trite, but for the most part, the women and men in this profession come to work every day to do a very difficult job. I can tell you this summer was the most challenging time I've ever had as a police chief. And I'm sure it was one of the most challenging times for the women and men of this department. But as I said earlier, we recognize the grievances from the past and folks want to have an opportunity to protest. We allowed them to protest, even sometimes where they were not very polite. But you know what we did? We went to the next intersection and made it safe for them to continue to protest. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. Hopefully this is not the last opportunity we have to speak about this subject. I think we spend a whole lot of time celebrating the problem where we should really have some hard, candid conversations with measurable outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll go over to Mr. Jones, then we'll do Chief Newdigate and this Ms. Knoyton, and then we'll go to the award presentation. So keep it 20 to 30 seconds, but over to you.
All right, I want to thank the 200 plus men of Hampton Roads again for this opportunity. And also, this has been a very enriching and educational conversation for myself, as well as just being able to participate and give the perspective of the Hampton NAACP.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for joining us. I know we have a little bit more time, so we can lengthen out these responses, but over to Chief Newdigate and then Ms. Knoyton, and then I'll wrap up. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you to 200 plus men, everybody that the community that participated. I think the vision for VBPD moving forward, we all think it's addressing crime. Number one priority is relationship building. We are eyes open, ears open to take our direction from our community. And we look forward to a continued partnership. And thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, over to you for the last word.
I too want to thank the 200 plus men for inviting me to be on this panel, and also for the great discussion that we had today, and thank our panelists as well. I would be remiss if I didn't invite everyone to please join the oldest, the boldest, the baddest grassroots organization, the NAACP, in your city, because we need more soldiers on the ground to help us, with this, to fight social justice, to make sure that we have social justice. I also want to say that there are police chiefs hirings going on right now. That's in Suffolk, it's in Portsmouth and Hampton. If you live in these cities, get involved, find out what's going on, and find out where they are in the hiring period of this, because it's very important that the community be involved with who's going to be the next police chief. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Chief Boone.
Sorry, I neglected to recognize and thank the NAACP members and congratulate them on the great work they're doing in the community. I should have said that in my closing remarks.
Perfect. Well, I think we hit everyone. I want to say to Chief Boone, Mr. Jones, Ms. Knoyton, Chief Newdigate, and Dr. Perkins, thank you very much for your time and your insight on this very critical topic. We truly believe this interchange broadened the knowledge base of our audience and hopefully will help to contribute to the positive steps that are taking place in Hampton Roads. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, it comes to the 200 plus men awards. The Hampton Roads Committee of 200 plus men has established several annual awards to recognize local leaders in areas that correspond to the organization's standing committees. For the Education Committee, the Charles G. Woodson Award is given to an educator. For the Community Initiatives Committee, the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Award is given to a community leader. For the Economic Advancement Committee, the John J. Johnson Award is given to a business person. And as part of our signature event, the Scholars Recognition Program, a young adult who is demonstrating community leadership at an early age will be given the John Lewis Award. Today, we will present the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Award to a local community leader. I'm going to read a letter while we have the trophy being displayed. The winner is Dana Dixon, has over 15 years of progressive training and experience, and as a licensed clinical social worker, acts as an agent of change. Dana is interested in equity, diversity, and inclusion for the Black community, and is primarily focused on mental health of the Black community and social justice. Dana has the unique privilege of employment in both the private sector and in the public education sector, and inspires by advocating for social justice and the healing of racial trauma.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Dixon, and I'm honored to accept the 200+ Men Samuel DeWitt Proctor Award for Community Service from the Hampton Roads Committee of 200+ Men Incorporated. Thank you for recognizing my hard work to bring awareness to the mental health needs of the Black community. Our community has suffered hundreds of years of trauma, and its effects are far-reaching. It is my goal to increase access, eliminate stigma, and break barriers to treatment and other therapeutic supports. I encourage by delivering the highest quality of mental health services that are culturally responsive and culturally competent for the Black community. African American clients don't often feel comfortable or understood when seeking therapeutic services that do not recognize their cultural background and how their race impacts their mental health. I inspire by advocating for social justice and the healing of racial trauma. I'm particularly interested in the trauma associated with race and social justice. Representation matters. Our community has to heal from within while advocating for our needs across the broader society. I enable the growth and healing of youth in the African American community by increasing access to mental health services and quality community-based resources to those who otherwise would have limitations. A very special thanks to the Community Initiatives Committee for highlighting all of the amazing work happening all around our community. And an enormous salute to all of this year's nominees, each of whom have made incredible contributions to Hampton Roads. I am truly humbled and thankful. God bless.
Congratulations, Ms. Dixon. And on behalf of the Hampton Roads Committee of 200+ Men, we wish you continued energy and success in your service to our community. And now I'd like to turn the microphone over to the president of the Hampton Roads Committee of 200+ Men, Mr. Jimmy Gray. This has been Philip Jones from Newport News signing off. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Philip. Wonderful job moderating our panel discussion today. And, it was a very informative discussion, and I want to extend congratulations to Dana Dixon on the being selected for this year's Samuel DeWitt Proctor Award. She certainly is deserving of that recognition. And although this Proctor Forum was a free event, as you can imagine, it's not free to execute many of the programs and events that are arranged and organized by 200+ Men. We rely solely on sponsorships and donations to pay for all of our activities throughout the year. In that effort, we leverage our tax-deductible status as a 501c3 organization to lessen fees and illicit contributions. So your donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. If you're so inclined, please go to our homepage of the 200+ Men website. At the bottom, under quick links, you'll see a tab entitled Donate. Clicking that tab will take you to a page where you can make your selections. Your generosity will be greatly appreciated. And while you're on the 200+ Men website, please take a moment to learn more about the organization and our programs. And ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's event. And we thank you again to our panel for that extremely informative discussion. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great day.